am Lequita Brooks, your host and social impact speaker and strategist. Welcome to Social Impact Sundays at 6, where we have massive social impact that leads to income. And today we have Dr. Jacob Kendall as our guest. He is the versatile social worker. And let me tell you about Dr. Jacob Kendall. The thing I love most about Jacob is that he is a proponent of macro social work. He actually has a dual degree with the MSW and MPH, because I know that there are a lot of social workers who kind of debate, like, well, should I have done this? Should I not have done this? Or even aspiring social workers who are like, I can't really decide. Like, I want to do both. And guess what? You can do both. And that's exactly what Dr. Jacob Kendall has done. I thank him. I appreciate him for joining us on this segment of the social work movement. So welcome, Dr. Kendall.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. And you and I have had several interactions over the past couple of years, and I'm glad to have you in my network and to be in yours.
Yes, indeed. So just go ahead and just tell us all about the versatile social worker, because I know you have tons of beliefs and philosophies. Because guess what? A lot of times we focus so much on micro social work, more that direct practice, but there are so many other social workers out here in the world. So tell me about your practice and all the amazing things that you're doing in the macro world.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. I've had a little respiratory thing, so I have a little bit of raspy voice. I have a 1-year-old in daycare, so that comes with the territory. So yeah, I did the MSW MPH dual degree, and truth be told, I have a greater affinity for public health. My PhD is in gerontology. Technically, it's an interdisciplinary aging studies, and the interdisciplinary part is the reason that I did it. And so I knew going into grad school, my dad was a social worker, so I had exposure to that, and I knew I was interested in public health. And those, it's very common to find those dual degree programs. And so I've grown up wanting to be a Renaissance person. I like having my hands in multiple cookie jars. So I knew that I was going to get a couple of different degrees, but macro social work and public health have a lot of overlap with one another. And so that's just kind of always been my path. And then straight out of the PhD, I got a job teaching social work for a couple of years at a small conservative evangelical institution in rural Indiana. Very interesting context in which to teach social work. And in that small department, I was known as the macro guy. The other faculty were all clinical background. They didn't want to teach the macro course. They didn't feel equipped to teach the macro course. But I was only a visiting assistant professor because the CSWE, which accredits social work programs, deemed the other faculty more equipped to teach a macro practice course because they had some kind of practice experience. They wouldn't count all the research that I did for my PhD as practice. And this is when I started to see a problem with the social work identity, because we advertised this macro part of it, but for the first time in my life, actually seeing an action butting up against this problem with a macro identity. Like, why would the CSWE say that someone with a completely clinical background is more equipped to teach a macro course than I am, even though she had no macro experience? And they could not offer me a tenure track position because without that clinical experience and it being a small department, they could not afford to hire someone who was not capable of, according to the CSWE, of teaching all the different macro or the practice courses. And so these are the early days of me becoming disgruntled with macro social work. And it kind of just kept on going up and up from there. So I then taught global health at my next stop, a university in Georgia, which was closer to home anyway. I'm from Alabama, so I was fine not to stay in Indiana, but the principle of the matter would just really ate at me. And there are several reasons why I left my tenure track position teaching global health. I thought I could do better with salary. That's important for social workers who want to pivot out of clinical and case management into more, I'll just put everything else into the umbrella of macro. And one of the things that I encourage them on is, like, you deserve to have good money. That's another thing that I've become disgruntled with social work. Our recent graduates tell me that their professors would tell them, well, you don't go into social work for the money, or it'd be evil for you to make over $55,000. Like, social work professors are still teaching these things. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is the 21st century. It's not going to work anymore. And so I share my own story with my clients. Like, listen, I left a secure job because I could project my salary 30 years down the road, and I thought I could do better as a business owner than I could as a professor. And it's just preposterous to me that I have the highest degree that it's possible to earn in my field. But here are these, university presidents making 5, 6, however much times as more as professors. And it's really similar in social work. Social workers have amazing skills, but you and I both know, Lequita, that not expect higher salary. And I think that's ridiculous. So I share my own story with my clients because I want them to know, listen, I got your back. You have every right to want more money. I had a second heart surgery, and that created a huge rift in my life. I got married. I became a father. All these things came together within a couple of years, and massive life changes. And so I left my secure tenure track position, started a few businesses. One of them is the versatile social worker, and that's what you asked me about. I wanted to give some context leading up to it. So I think social workers belong. There's no table at which social workers don't belong. I mean, can you imagine a world in which a society in which politicians and CEOs and hospital administrators and these other people with power are working alongside social workers, or social workers are those people, and they're bringing the social workers are bringing their skills of active listening and empathy and meeting the other person where they are in this micro, meso, macro perspective, and applying those skills to those settings. I think we would be in a better society if that were the case. And so that's kind of one of the driving forces of what I do and why I started the program. And it speaks for itself. I think the MSW degree is a hell of a lot more versatile than most MSW programs are teaching. And I still get people telling me that they equate macro social work with policy because that's what their professors tell them. And I'm like, macro social work is 1,000 times larger than policy. Come on, people. let's realize that. And I'll go ahead and throw in here that another something that has kind of organically become an important part of my program is confidence, assertiveness, directness, addressing imposter syndrome. I consider all those to be related. Most social workers are women. Then you have just the social work piece itself with how our traditional roles are valued in society. And so you put those variables up next to one another, and that basically means I think all those variables are important and contributing to the fact that imposter syndrome is very, very high in social work right now. And so I found, again, it just happened organically. I started out just by helping with resumes and cover letters and whatnot. That just happens to be a natural skill of mine. But then it turned into a much larger thing because then my clients would come back and say, hey, I got this interview, but I didn't do well in the interview, or I didn't do well in salary negotiation. I didn't even know I should ask for that, and all these things. So I created a larger program around that. And I think, pivoting your career is not easy. But, social workers have these challenges with pivoting their career. And I don't think that I could do a good job of the program if I didn't also address imposter syndrome and some of these internal things that are going on. I tried to give a succinct kind of backstory there, but feel free to ask any follow-up questions.
Yes. So I do have tons of follow-up questions, but I first want to start with, how do you differentiate micro social work, what you typically hear about, and then macro social work? And you've already let us know macro social work is way more than policy. So kind of tell us the differences, and then also tell us what in the world is macro social work, since we have this narrative that it's all about policy.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question so I could have the opportunity to answer. And I'm guilty of this sometimes too, because I'll even do polls on LinkedIn and whatnot. Are you a micro, meso, or macro social worker? I mainly do that because that's how many people think. But truth be told, Lequita, I don't actually think that they're completely distinct categories. I see it more as a continuum of categories. The sociobiologist Edward O. Wilson, he wrote a book called Consilience, and I'd probably consider it to be the single most impactful book that I've ever read. And he talks about the continuum of knowledge from math and physics and the natural sciences and the social sciences and then the humanities and how it doesn't make sense to have these separate silos like you do in universities. It's really this continuum of knowledge, and they should be interacting with one another. And so I use that framework when talking about the things that social workers can be doing. And that's how I think most social work practice is. I can't tell you the number of times I've had a conversation. I mean, this is very, very common where I get on a discovery call with a prospect and they'll say, yeah, but I don't have any macro experience. I'm looking at their resume, or I look at their LinkedIn. I saw that they were a case manager. And I'm like, okay, did you lead meetings with interdisciplinary teams, which of course all case managers have done? Did you go present at conferences or to the local government about some part of your program? Have you connected clients to resources out in the communities? Have you done assessments and all these things? And the answer to all those questions is yes. And I'm like, you've done macro work. You just don't see it that way because the MSW program, I think, is, and the NASW Code of Ethics is so strongly biased toward viewing everything that we do through a micro lens. And I'm trying to break that down. And so I would define, you even asked me before we started this interview, have I ever done any micro work? And I said, basically, no. But what I would say is that you can't possibly do macro work without also interacting with individuals. There's no possible way to do that. And very few social workers, even therapists, are, even though they're more in the clinical micro realm, they're still doing some of those things that I would call more macro, where they're using that bigger picture. So I don't really see them as distinct categories. But for the purposes of my business, I tell my prospects that I define macro as pretty much anything outside of case management and clinical. But that's more of a functional definition than it is the way that I really envision society, is that we don't have those distinct categories. But for the purposes of getting people into the conversation, that's what I typically say. I just put everything else under macro. Does that answer your question?
It does. And with you saying all of that, it sounds like a lot of these micro social workers who do direct practice and clinical work, they're already doing macro work. So what advice or tips would you give to individuals that desire to make that pivot, or to add an additional income stream, or doing something in addition to what they already do? Because of
Yeah.
earlier, like the versatility of this degree, they can do so much. So what would be some tips and strategies you would support them in pivoting or just adding something to what they're already doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say a few different things in no particular order. One, just go ahead and accept that whatever you've done, therapy, case management, uh, hospital social worker, whatever, um, you have skills that apply outside of those settings. Because another common thing I get is the social workers, like I'm on a discovery call with them or whatnot, and they'll tell me, oh, well, I'm just looking for other social work roles, and they restrict themselves to that. I'm like, no, let's reframe this. Why don't you just look for roles for whatever the hell you want to do? Take social work out of it, right? Because social worker means case manager these days when you actually see it in a job title. And so basically just don't limit themselves, and realize that your skills, even if your entire career is in healthcare, those skills are going to apply in other settings, period. All right. The second thing is, go ahead and start addressing your imposter syndrome. Realize that everyone has imposter syndrome. You're not unique for having it. And I realize, and I know what I'm saying here, Lequita. I'm a white man, and there's a lot of privilege that comes with that. And like I said earlier, social workers are, a lot of social workers are women, and I can't relate to that. And I get it. You have these embedded messages in our society that come with having these identities. I understand that, but I'm also going to be really, really blunt and say that yes, you do have these external messages about the value that you have in your in society, and yes, that does affect how you feel. But try to see all of that as just as being internal and something that you can address, because imposter syndrome is something that people can address. Again, I'm not ignoring those external factors, but we have the power within ourselves. We have the capacity to realize, okay, a lot of this is coming from internal. I am a badass, and I should see that, and I want to learn how to convey that to other people. That's what I imagine. That's what I want my clients to say, right? And so if imposter syndrome is something that most people have, then it's a variable that you can simply cancel out because most people have it. Let's focus on the good stuff, right? And then finally, I would say be prepared to invest in yourself, whether it's with me or some other career coach. There are several of us out there helping social workers make the pivots. But invest in yourself because it's not easy to pivot, but it is possible. And the bottom line is most people are not very good at a resume or cover letter. They're not very good at assertiveness. They're not very good at networking, and you need to learn how to do those things. Stop submitting spray and pray. Stop submitting 200, 300 applications. Actually have a strategy and work with a mentor or a career coach or someone who can help you with that. Go back to what I said at the beginning of this point. This is what I would tell a client. You are worth investing in, so be prepared to invest in yourself. So those are a few points that I would say.
So you have said a lot. Some of the key things is not just looking for positions that use the term social work, because there's
Yeah.
so many other job titles that you can attain with your transferable skills or even entrepreneurial endeavors. There's so many things that you can
Yeah.
do outside of things that just have the title, social work. Also recognizing that imposter syndrome is something that is completely normal. But even with having imposter syndrome, it's about getting the support you need and actually acting, doing something, being intentional, being strategic. It's an act. So the only way to truly overcome imposter syndrome is actually to do something about it. I know you, oh my goodness, you have all this amazing experience. You're the versatile social worker and you're going into doing more speaking engagements. So, what would that look like? What would be some of the topics that you plan to talk about? Because you have so many things that you can discuss and so many things you're passionate about. So what is that going to look like as you go into more speaking?
Yeah, that's what I feel like too. It's interesting for you. You said it a couple of times now that I'm the versatile social worker. I named that program because I want my clients to see themselves that way. um, so that's interesting. Anyway, I thought that was funny. Yeah, you're right. And you and I submitted a proposal to a conference, and I want to do more of that. Is go speak at social work conferences. I'm still in the very early stages of figuring out which audience would be best. Quite frankly, I would love to go into social work departments as well and like do workshops for their people who are their students who are in their last semester. Because I see a lot of people who recently graduated and their resume is not very good. They don't know how to properly market themselves. And so that pretty much tells me that the MSW programs are not teaching them those things. But universities don't pay very well. Uh, so I don't know if that's going to be a sustainable path moving forward. Um, I also just, it's easier for me to think of myself in academia because I was raised in academia with a PhD, and that's what they train you to. I was a professor for a few years, so I'm still working that out, Lequita. Quite honestly, I agree with you that I have some things to say. Where would be some good audiences can go and talk to social workers and other interdisciplinary professionals about these same points that we've covered in this talk. So I'm still trying to work that out. But I will say that what the motivation there is over my several years of teaching as a professor, I had a lot of moments where like, oh, this activity that we just did in class, this would be awesome in another setting. Or I bet this whole lecture that I gave, this would work great on a stage or as a keynote or something like that. And I also got a lot of affirmation from my students. I have students tell me, "Oh, Dr. Kendall, I can listen to you talk all day," and or they would keep a notebook full of quotable things that I said throughout the semester. And so I'm kind of at a point where, like, I know I've got something to say. I know there's someone who needs to hear it. Where do I fit there? I just have to be honest about it. I'm still in the early stages of it.
And that's totally fine. And I think that the first step is even being aware. Like, I have a lot to say, I have tons of knowledge, and I am extremely passionate about it. And I think as time progresses, it will come to you and
Yeah,
those opportunities will be presented. And like I said to you earlier, it kind of caught you off guard as I'm calling you the versatile social worker, but that's what makes us amazing. That's what makes us the best coaches, trainers, consultants, because we embody those beliefs. We are that person. Hence, why we turn around and attract who we
yeah,
are, or individuals that aspire to be what we're doing because we embody that. So yes, Dr. Kendall, you are the versatile social worker, and that's why you attracted the clients that you have attracted in your coaching practice. And that's why you will attract those speaking opportunities in whichever realm that looks like, but you're going to attract those things because that's who you are as a person, because it starts with us.
Well, I appreciate the affirmation. That's encouraging. So thank you.
And listen, I need you to be like modest about this, because you're being so modest and so humble. Like, yes, and just like you talked about with your clients, you talk about assertiveness, you talked about being intentional, you talked about them being confident, you talked about them speaking up for themselves.
True. Yeah, that's all true.
You're like, yeah, it's true. Yes, it is true. So, as we're wrapping up, what piece of advice, what are some things you want to share, even some social work narratives that you want to dismantle completely? Goodbye, adios, good riddance forever.
Yeah, I feel like we're the profession is at a crossroads right now, and I think now is an excellent time for many social workers to really step up and show what they have. And I think it's going to happen both at the individual level, individual social workers deciding that they had that value and going out there and showing it. But I think there has to be some collectivity, some collective action as well. You know, you've seen nurses go through unions and they've achieved a lot through that: higher pay, more respect. Teachers are starting to do that. So we have these examples that I think could work. Um, so I think it has to happen both at the micro and the macro level. We are at a crossroads, and it's there are definitely some moments when I don't feel all the optimism about our profession. And you know what? There are other people who feel that way as well, and those moments are okay too. It's okay to feel that way. Let's talk about all of them and see what we come up with when we have a conversation about it. And of course, I have other moments when I'm feeling very optimistic because I think the MSW has a lot of power if we choose to wield it well. So, yeah, let's start having more of these conversations.
Exactly. And that is why the social work movement was formed. Because I would hear so many social workers and social work groups who were either bitter, broke, burnout, complaining about the profession, or saying that they wish they would have never went into social work. They would never encourage their kids to go into the profession. But the
Yeah,
reality is, I can understand if every single social worker was bitter, broken, burnt out. But guess what? That's never been my experience, and it doesn't sound like
yeah,
your experience or even other people
right.
that know. So that means it is totally possible to be able to make money and make a difference. So this is why, this platform was created to create awareness and highlight all the amazing things that we do. So then we can be valued, respected, and let's not forget, well compensated for all the
Yes,
transferable skills, degrees, certifications, and all the things.
yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Like I said at the beginning, I'm glad to be that we're a part of one another's network, and I'm sure that we'll collaborate on other things in the future.
Definitely. So I thank you so much, Dr. Jacob Kendall, for joining me today on Social Impact Sundays, where we have massive social impact that leads to income. I am Lequita Brooks, your host and social impact speaker and strategist. Make sure you go to booklequita.com for speaking engagements. Until next time, have an amazing day.